Hey everyone, you know it's easy to be under the impression that the ground beneath our feet is solid. But that's not the case. The Earth is always shifting and changing, sometimes leading to the creation of large sinkholes. They can develop without warning and often wreak havoc in heavy populated areas. So join me, we're going to travel around the globe to see 15 sinkholes that appeared out of nowhere. Number 15, the National Corvette Museum in Kentucky. Built in 1994, the National Corvette Museum, which is in Bowling Green, Kentucky, houses one of the largest and most valuable collections of Chevrolet Corvettes in the world. The vehicle, which has been in production since 1953, is now built less than a quarter of a mile from the museum at the Bowling Green assembly plant. And if you're a fan, there's no better place to go to see how they've changed over the years. The museum, though, made headlines around the world in February of 2014, not because of the array of rare vehicles on display, but because of something that happened as a result of Kentucky's limestone landscape. Early in the morning on the 12th, the foundations beneath the Sky Dome area of the museum had become weakened to such an extent that the weight of the building caused the subterranean cavern to collapse, and a sinkhole formed. Caught on security camera, 8 of the extremely rare Corvettes, as well as display stands and concrete slabs, fell into the hole, with the damage to the cars alone estimated to have been more than $1 million. The remaining 20 cars in the showroom were quickly taken to a safe location, and a retrieval effort began that, surprisingly, was actually able to salvage 5 of the cars that had fallen into the sinkhole within a matter of days, with the others needing to be left there until the foundations could be reinforced. The museum reopened for visitors just a day after the incident, and there's now a brand new exhibit dedicated to the sinkhole, where visitors are able to try their hand at virtually retrieving the cars that had fallen in. Luckily, though, the damaged vehicles have now all been restored to their former glory, which is a testament to how sturdy and well-built those classic cars were. Number 14, Fukuoka, Japan. When sinkholes, or potholes, form in most places around the world, it can take a frustratingly long time for them to be repaired so people can get back to their normal lives. But an event that took place in Japan in early November 2016 proves it doesn't always have to be like this. At around 5 a.m. in downtown Fukuoka, locals reported the power had gone out and they were hearing huge booming noises from outside. Looking out their windows, they saw that a giant sinkhole had opened up that had swallowed the entire width of a 5-lane road. By the time things had settled, the hole was at least 65 feet deep and was full of debris like traffic lights, and it also exposed the foundations of the nearby buildings. Said by authorities to be unprecedented and later blamed on leaks that had been caused by nearby construction works on a subway line, Fukuoka Airport suffered a power outage too, as did 800 homes, and the area was evacuated because of the concern of further holes opening up and because of the risk of gas explosions. Possibly the most surprising aspect, though, was how quickly structural support was put in place and the way that the road had been completely fixed and reopened within a week. Workers filled in the hole with what they called special soil, and despite an incident later in the month when it sunk by a few inches, it's been completely stable ever since. I wish my state was like that. Number 13, Guatemala City, Guatemala. Natural sinkholes are normally associated with regions that sit above large limestone formations, but this isn't the only material that can slowly be eroded by water to create caverns beneath the surface that'll eventually collapse. That's what residents of Guatemala City learned in June of 2010 when they heard an almighty crash and discovered a huge new hole that had appeared in the street. It happened a few days after Tropical Storm Agatha had passed by, and initially was assumed that this was the cause of the hole. Water flowing over a short period of time, though, wouldn't be enough to create a chasm that measured 60 feet wide and 300 feet deep, and the storm instead was likely to have just been what triggered the collapse. Guatemala City itself is built on top of ground that's mainly made up of pumice fill, which is a material that's deposited during volcanic eruptions. Often because of its heat and weight, this will become solid rock, but it's unconsolidated in this particular region and so is easily erodible by water. This, combined with very few city regulations surrounding the installation and maintenance of water pipes, is what's believed to have been the cause of the sinkhole. Just a small trickle from a water main over a number of years would have been enough to carve a large hole, and the water from the tropical storm likely overloaded the city's sewage pipes and also increased the weight of the topmost surface, which collapsed without any support from below. Number 12, Rotorua, New Zealand. Rotorua in New Zealand is a region that's long been associated with geological activity, and it was in May of 2018 on a farm in a place called Earthquake Flat that an unusual type of sinkhole suddenly appeared. Over the previous weekend, there had been a torrential storm during which almost 7 inches of rain had fallen in 38 hours. This water, of course, had to flow somewhere, and in a place that's prone to earthquakes, there are natural fault lines that run beneath the ground. These act as natural channels for water which pass through them and carves the rock to form subterranean cavities. Once enough of the material had been removed, the surface layer collapsed and revealed a huge crack in the landscape that measured 656 feet long and looking similar to what you might expect to find after a powerful earthquake. Amazingly, this particular sinkhole was found to have exposed the summit of a volcano that had last erupted around 60,000 years ago, which would have dispersed a huge amount of material over the surrounding area. Sinkholes like these are fairly common around this area and give geologists a fascinating glimpse at the different layers of rock and how it was formed over tens of thousands of years. Of course, it was far less exciting for the farmer who owned the land, who was forced to find a new path to herd their livestock to new fields. Number 11. Sheregesh, Russia. When you go to a ski resort, you're normally advised to keep to the marked slopes to guarantee a perfect condition to carve through the snow, and while you may expect to come across a crevasse or an obstruction if you decide to take your own path, guests of a popular Russian resort close to the Sheregesh mine in the Kemerovo region of Siberia would have been in for a huge surprise in 2022 if they ventured too far. A huge 100-foot wide hole had opened up in the ice to the side of a road and perilously close to some houses, one of which sat dangerously on the edge of the opening. Rather than being a surprise though, something like this was actually expected, so much so that the houses had been evacuated a few days earlier. That's because the region is home to a valuable mining operation that had expanded in recent years. Instability had been detected in the ground, which is why there was enough of a warning to move people out of harm's way. And in the aftermath, mining was suspended so the tunnels could be surveyed for any further risk. Eventually, the local authorities plan to refill the hole that formed, and it's hoped that precautionary measures will prevent something like it from ever happening again. Still, you better be extra vigilant if you are ever going to take to those slopes again. Number 10. Konya Valley, Turkey. The Konya Valley is in the middle of Turkey's so-called breadbasket, which is a region that, because of its fertile soil and favorable conditions, is crucial to the country's agricultural industry. There are vast quantities of crops such as beetroot and corn, but in recent years they've been increasingly struck by prolonged periods of drought. This has led to the formation of countless sinkholes across the plains, with hundreds appearing each year, and it's becoming such a problem that farmers are now changing the types of crops that they can grow. The reason these sinkholes are being created is because of the falling level of the water table. The ground is made up of a limestone that's normally moist, but because of the drought and the intensive farming that uses vast amounts of groundwater, the limestone is drying out, and the ground beneath it, which is normally wet and able to support the weight of what's above it, is drying too and becoming weaker. Ultimately, this leads to a collapse, which can show itself at surface level as a small depression of a few feet, or something far more treacherous like ones that are several hundred feet deep. Luckily, it's rare that anyone's seriously hurt because of the sparse population density, but farmers are now looking at crops that require less water in an attempt to minimize how often this is happening. Number 9. DeSeta, Texas. The town of DeSeta, Texas has a troubled history when it comes to sinkholes, and this is the place that's been most struck by the phenomena in the whole of the U.S. The reason for this is that it's actually built on top of a natural salt dome that formed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago, when a lake that was once in the region dried up. This means the ground is extremely vulnerable to being eroded away by water and has led to several large sinkholes in the past few decades. In 1969, a large hole opened up to the surprise of everyone living there, and it collapsed even further in 1981 to form a large hole that now has a lake at the bottom of it. The presence of the water inside the hole has led to it gradually growing ever since, and is now 250 feet wide and 30 feet deep. As it increases in size, it's created instability elsewhere too, and it's believed to have been a contributing factor to another sinkhole that opened up in 2008. This one, known as the Sinkhole de Mayo because of the date when it collapsed, has also been linked with the human activity in the area, and it's now much larger than the others at 600 feet long, 525 feet wide, and 150 feet deep. With this ever-present risk, it's no surprise that people have been moving away from DeSeta since the first hole opened up. and the once thriving town now has a population of just over 900 people. Number 8. Mulberry, Florida. Aquifers are huge underground regions of permeable rock that absorb large quantities of water and are vital to the provision of clean, fresh water to homes across the world. But due to their porous nature, they can create regions of instability that sometimes leads to the development of sinkholes. This can be problematic if these openings lead to substances contaminating the water in the aquifer, and the worst known example of this took place in Mulberry, Florida in 2016. A 45-foot diameter sinkhole opened up above an aquifer which provides water to most of the state, but this one just so happened to develop beneath a wastewater storage pond that was operated by Mosaic, the biggest phosphate fertilizer manufacturer in the world. It would take 3 weeks for the company to publicly acknowledge what had happened, and in that time more than 215 million gallons of radioactive and contaminated water had drained through the hole into the aquifer before being able to divert anything else that was being stored there. Luckily, the contaminated water was slow moving through the aquifer, and there was time to pump it back out before it reached the public source. It was a close call though, and shows just how easy it could have been for an absolute catastrophe to take place. Number 7. Michonchani, Croatia. In late 2020, central Croatia was struck by an earthquake with a magnitude of 6.4 that was felt across the entire country and some neighboring regions. It killed 7 people and injured a further 26, as well as causing a large amount of damage to buildings. But the lasting effect of the incident was how dramatically it altered structures beneath the surface. Croatia is a place famed for its dinaric karst geology, which means that it has vast subterranean limestone formations that have been carved away by water over tens of thousands of years. There are countless cave systems throughout the country, with 3 that are known to extend deeper than 3,200 feet, and on occasion some of these caves will lose their structural integrity and collapse to form a sinkhole at the surface. The earthquake, though, changed all of this, and in the following months at least 100 new sinkholes had opened up in villages, when they'd normally expect to see 1 or 2 in a year. The reason for this sudden increase was the tremor had caused many of those precarious cave ceilings and pillars to collapse, and it was only a matter of time until the roof caved in as well. With some of the sinkholes opening in fields, but others being revealed beneath houses and in streets, it was incredibly lucky that no one was injured or killed. Things seem to have stabilized for now, but the fear is that even if the region experiences a moderate earthquake in the near future, there could be many more caves waiting to collapse, and there's no way to know which one could be next. Number 6. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The 3 states in the United States that experience the highest number of sinkholes of all are Florida, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. This, of course, is due to the underlying geological formations that run beneath the surface, but human activity can also cause it to be far more likely. In Pennsylvania, for example, large areas of the state will never see a sinkhole form, but other parts see them on regular occasions. One incident that took place in late 2019 made national news because of how visible it was, after a hole opened up beneath the street in Pittsburgh and the Port Authority bus became trapped inside it. The hole itself was around 20 feet deep, and it cost the city almost $100,000 to remove the bus, but the incident could have been completely avoided. So much of the area has been paved over or built up without any regard for the natural waterways that existed on the landscape before. That water, instead of being guided away, is left little option but to form its own route into the ground. This means it'll pass through any gaps or cracks that it finds as it travels down into the earth. It begins to erode away at soil and foundations. Things are made worse by cracks in utility pipes that are usually buried beneath the streets, and this event in Pittsburgh was almost likely caused by a leaking water main that had created a cavern beneath the road over many years, waiting for enough weight to pass over it to cause a collapse. Aging cities like this are likely going to experience an increased number of sinkholes in the coming years because of this, and there are some scientists who believe it'll become a part of everyday life within a decade or so. Number 5. Caerphilly, Wales. Caerphilly in Wales is one of the most picturesque locations in the entire country and attracts people from far and wide looking for peaceful and spectacular routes to walk along. Locals were surprised, though, in early January of 2013 when people reported the discovery of a huge sinkhole near a popular walkway and a main road, and there had been no previous signs of unstable ground. Measuring around 30 feet across and about 10 feet deep, what was interesting was that there was already a stream flowing into it, which shows just how much water there is to carve away at the ground beneath the surface. The village itself was originally founded to support coal mines in the surrounding area, which, despite being closed for a long time, have also reduced the structural integrity of the ground. This sinkhole is expected to be just the first of many that'll open up, and urgent assessments are now underway to try to ensure the local infrastructure, like roads and buildings, aren't in any imminent risk of being affected. Number 4. Tierra, Amarilla, Chile. In late July of 2022, an enormous sinkhole opened up near the town of Tierra Amarilla in Chile, which would lead to a government investigation and sanctions being enforced upon a local company. Located in the north of the country, the region where the sinkhole opened up is known for its copper mining, and when the hole was first discovered, it was around 82 feet across and had visible water at the bottom. Over the following days, though, it continued to grow, and within a week it had expanded to measure 160 feet across and 650 feet deep. This meant that it was large enough to fit the Space Needle from Seattle inside it, and it triggered concerns that it would either continue to grow or was just the first of many that were also about to form. Mining operations were immediately suspended, with shallow tunnels seen to be the most likely cause of this sinkhole. The Geology and Mining Service installed water pumps in the tunnels of the mine to dry it out and conducted investigations into whether the underground chambers had been over-extracted, in contravention to the mining license, with the major fear being that some of the tunnels had been completely flooded, which would create the potential for further collapses. Luckily for locals, though, no more sinkholes opened up, and the report following the investigation concluded that this one had happened both because of abnormal rainfall in the previous month and because of poor management of the mine. The mine's owners were sanctioned and are now subjected to regular checks, with the hope that this will prevent it from ever happening again. Number 3. Tallahassee, Florida. A Tallahassee resident who had lived in his mobile home in the same place for 11 years got the shock of his life when he woke up one morning to find that a huge 50-foot sinkhole had opened up and swallowed his front yard. As he peered out of his window, dirt was still falling into the void that a pine tree had already disappeared into, and his neighbor's home was also precariously sitting on the edge of it. This wasn't the first time a sinkhole had developed on the site, as a smaller one had also formed a few years earlier that had since been filled in. Those close to this new one reported feeling a rumbling sensation in the ground 2 days before it happened, which they now think was a sign that the earth beneath them was shifting and rearranging itself. The nearby homes were evacuated so the hole could be assessed, and eventually the decision was made to fill it in with topsoil because there were no signs that it was going to collapse any further. Everyone at the site has now been warned to be alert to any tremors they experience in the future, though, just in case it's a sign that another event like this will happen, as next time they may not be so lucky and a hole could easily open up beneath someone's home. Number 2. San Rafael, Colombia. Predicting where new sinkholes will open up is a virtually impossible task because we simply don't know where underground cavities are forming and when they might collapse. This means that each one is somewhat of a surprise, and a newly formed one in early 2020 has had far more drastic consequences than most. At more than 500 feet tall, the San Rafael waterfall was the largest in Ecuador and was one of the most scenic regions on the country's border with Colombia. With tens of thousands of visitors each year, the Colombian government hailed it as a great example of ecotourism. But suddenly, on the 2nd of February 2020, the water stopped flowing over it. Officials were dispatched to the area to find out what had happened, and they discovered to their horror that a huge sinkhole had opened up beneath the river that fed the waterfall, and that all the water was now falling into this hole instead. The main river is now splitting into 3 smaller ones, and these have formed 3 new waterfalls nearby. Unfortunately, none of them can be seen from the expensive viewing platforms that had been built around the original. There's debate, too, about quite how this sinkhole was formed. It seems to be because far less sediment is being deposited by the river, which means the water had been able to erode further into the bed and connect with a subterranean cavity. Some point the finger at a new hydroelectric plant a few miles upstream, while others believe the sediment has been blocked by a naturally occurring dam that was created by an earthquake several years ago. Number 1. Berezniki, Russia. The city of Berezniki is on the banks of the Karma River in the Ural Mountains of Russia, and it's one of the largest man-made sinkhole hotspots in the world. To understand this problem, you only need to look at the history of the city, which, while it's been a settlement for centuries, was only properly developed as a work camp by the Soviets to support a potash mine. Since then, the city has expanded and is a huge industrial center, but it's still mainly built on top of the subterranean tunnels of the mine, and this has led to severe problems. The mine itself is enormous and runs around 1,000 feet beneath Berezhniki. The supports of the tunnels, though, are made of the natural bedrock, which is compressed salt, so can easily be worn away by water when it floods through. There's believed to be one part of the mine in particular that's dangerous because it wasn't properly filled in after the useful material was extracted, and this is thought to have been the cause of several large sinkholes that have opened up in the city streets. The largest of all is known as the Grandfather, and it originally collapsed in 2007. It continued to expand and by 2012 measured over 1,000 feet wide, 1,280 feet long, and about 780 feet deep. Luckily, no one was injured, but the economic impact was huge because of its position. If it expands any further, it risks destroying the only rail line into the city, which would drastically affect exports from a region that produced 10% of the world's potash. The risk of further potholes in the city is so severe that there's an agency dedicated to constantly monitoring for them. There are now plans to completely relocate the entire city. I'll see you next time. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.